Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really exciting project. I did a Scrabble tile wall art project and all I used was one of these 1x4x8. I picked it up at Lowe's for $2.18. Now the actual size on this is only 3.5 inches wide. So what I did was I cut mine into 3.5 inch squares, which I think you can get 27 out of an 8-foot board. I only needed 24 for what I did, so I sanded them. I did get a hand sander for Christmas, so this made the process a lot easier. But by all means, if you don't have one, those little sanding sponges are really great and make things a lot easier than just a piece of sandpaper. So I sanded all of these down, and then I used some Minwax Classic Gray. I know the light is really dim. It was late at night on the night that I did this, so I was working by just a lamp. But I did have one piece while I was sanding that broke where a knot was, so I just used some super glue and glued that back together. I sat it to the side, and that was the last piece that I stained. So I put it on this first block just to see what it looked like. It honestly didn't look anything like I thought it was going to. So when I wiped it off, I was like, oh no, I wiped pretty much all the stain off. So I put another coat on, sat it to the side, and I went ahead and put a coat on all of them before I wiped it off because I wanted it to soak in a little bit more. Not to have a full-on gray tone, but just to have a little bit more color than the plain pine. So I stained all of I ended up using 24 for the names that I laid out on my wall. So I just put a coat all over these, and once I got it all on, then I wiped it off with my rag. You do want to use a lint-free rag. I chose a shop rag because that's what I had handy. An old t-shirt works great for this too. So I'm getting the edges just to make sure I have everything. And then once I wiped it off the front, I flipped it over and put a coat on the back as well. I ended up hanging mine with command strips, but if you wanted to put all those holes in the wall, sawtooth hanger would work great too. We have damaged the walls enough in this apartment, so I decided to go with command strips. I do recommend doing a heavier one because if you follow me on Instagram, you know the pain in the neck it was for me to do my gallery wall. I broke a few frames and had to end up going back and getting stronger command strips. So I do recommend going with stronger than the weight that they recommend. So I'm just finishing up getting all of these with a good coat on the front and the back. I watched a couple of videos of other people doing this, and everyone did it just a little bit different depending on how big your tiles are. I mean, if they were bigger or used a thinner block of wood, this happens to be about 3/4 of an inch thick. I guess, you know, depending on the weight, you could glue all of these together or put them all on like a furring strip or something like that and hang them as one piece. Mine are pretty small, so that's why I decided just to put them up with command strips. If you had a larger piece, and you know, it might be easier. I guess it just depends on what you end up using for your tiles. Some people actually found pieces at Dollar Tree where they came, they were like an unfinished wood. It came 9 in a pack, I think. It was actually craft wood. I couldn't find those. I've actually been wanting to do this for a while, so I've been on the lookout for those. But at $2.18 for all the tiles that I needed, I think this really turned out to be a great price for me. So now that I've got the stain on all of them, I'm just going back and wiping off the excess. And this was more the color I was going for. More of just a weathered look as opposed to full-on gray. Depending on the colors that you're going for, you could also paint these. I kind of wanted mine to stay wood. I not going to say I'm a huge Scrabble player, but Words with Friends, that's my jam. So these are the stencils that I ended up using. They came from Walmart for $3.88. You actually get 2 of each. So I did notice that some people, when they did it, they left the holes between the sides of the letters. But what I did was I did one side of the letter and then I kind of scooted it over. I think it worked out to be about 1/8 of an inch, and then did the other side so they actually met up. You'll Hopefully you can see what I'm saying. So I did the small part of the J, and then I just scooted the stencil over to do the larger part. That way it was all connecting. If you have a Cricut, I do, but I know that not everyone does. You could also do a stencil like that, or I guess if you have amazing handwriting, you can always freehand these. But I just used some apple barrel paint that I had, and I picked up some really cheap paintbrushes. I think they were $3 for a pack of 5. I picked them up at Dollar General since that's what's really close here to the house. And I ended up using one that it's a flat paintbrush. I think it was a number 2, and it had a slightly angled end. And hopefully when I start painting the letters, you'll be able to see. This first one is it has a blunt end, and I just used it for the red, but it would also be a good brush. I think it said number 2. I don't know much about paintbrushes, but like I said, these were really inexpensive, and I picked them up at Dollar General. I'm sure Walmart or your local craft store would have a good selection too. I just don't know much about paintbrushes. Now, of course, there's not a Scrabble tile with a heart on it, but I did want to bring just something else to my wall art, so I opted for a heart since there was a nice stencil in that pack. I'm not going to make you watch me painting all of them, but I did just film me painting my name first. That way you could see how easy it was when you had just a stencil with the, pencil letters. The other option is, and I did this on another video, it was one of my Christmas videos that I did in November, and I actually printed everything out on computer paper and rubbed a pencil over the back. You can also rub chalk on the back and then trace the letters, and the graphite or the chalk will transfer onto the wood that you're about to paint. So that's another way to do a stencil if you didn't want to buy something extra. I always thought that I had kind of shaky hands, but I found that it was actually easier to do this in just one fluid motion as far as I could get. And I just balanced my hand on the edge of the wood. And I actually didn't have anything that was horrendous or that I needed to clear up. So it ended up working out pretty good. Now, I did not buy a small stencil to put the number values on these. I ended up just freehanding those. Most of them happened to be 1s, so it wasn't a big deal. I think I had maybe 2 8s and a 10, a 4, the 2 was terrible, and a couple 3s. And to find those Scrabble values, if you don't know what they are, you can look it up on Google or Pinterest, and that's what I did. I just verified all the numbers on Pinterest. I found a printout that had all of them, and I just kind of used that as a reference. I did get out a little bit more paint than I needed, so I'm just going to try to take some of that excess off with the paintbrush and put it to the side. And then I'm going to use the black apple barrel paint for the rest of my letters. If you're worried about having crisp lines, you could outline these with a Sharpie or, some other type of marker, or even a paint marker would work for this if you didn't want to do paint and paintbrush. You could by all means do that as well. So I'll set that to the side, and I've got my black paint ready. And this is the brush that I really like to use the most. This is the one that kind of had a little bit of an angle to it, but again, it was a flat brush. And these brushes also have like a really long handle, which I don't know, it gave me better balance, I guess. But for those of you wishing that I would just hurry up, I apologize. I wanted to show this part not sped up. I do speed up, some of the other parts, but I wanted everyone to see how easy this was when you had a stencil. And this brush in that pack, like I said, it's a number 4. I'm not really sure what that number means, if it's the type of brush or if it's just specific to that set of brushes. I'm not sure, but it worked really, really well. Now, the Dollar General also had a set of those kind of cardboard stencils like I showed from Walmart. They had a little bit fancier font style, so I opted to go with these that I had picked up at Walmart. But if you wanted a different style of letter, then you could use those and pick them up a little bit cheaper. Like I said, you can also do anything, on printer paper and then transfer it that way. But I think these block letters look more true to the Scrabble game, and they're also so much easier to paint because there are a lot of straight lines. And I'm not going to lie, I was kind of nervous these first few letters, but once I did the first ones and realized that they didn't look bad at all, then they did go a lot easier. And I also used very, very little paint. Like I said, I ended up painting 23 that actually had letters on them, and I used very, very little paint. So I had picked up a new thing of the apple barrel, but I actually didn't even open it. I think on curves like this, though, that angle to the brush really does come in handy. Now there is another brush that has a smaller point, and that's the one I'm going to use. It also has a number 2 on it. Like I said, I'm not sure that those numbers mean anything, but it kind of has like a rounded point, and I put a very, very small amount of paint on. And like I said, I'm going to freehand the numbers. They probably would have been better stenciled, because, or possibly maybe I just needed a different type of brush. That could have been it too. But I did just freehand all of the numbers on. J happens to be a value of 8. Doesn't look terrible. It's a little lopsided, but it doesn't look terrible. And all vowels are 1. I just went for a stick instead of like a fancy one because I was afraid it would just get too thick and I'd mess it up. So I'm going to go back in with that flat brush again, the one that was numbered 4, and start my S. And again, that angle really is nice for curves. It just kind of lays in, and it's super easy to do the rounded letters. I do recommend being patient with this project, just because you need to let your stain completely cure and your paint completely dry. If you're using acrylic paint like me, of course it dries very fast, but do allow time for like sanding and things like that, especially if you're using a less expensive cut of wood like I did. There were some burrs, there are some knots. You can do another cut of wood that is a little bit nicer wood. I think they ranged anywhere from like $5 up to like $8 for the same size, a 1x4x8. So, I mean, you can put a little bit more money into it and have a completely different texture of wood.
That one, maybe put in a pack. Little pack and it lasts burn unit.
You also, I eyeballed my lettering when I was putting my stencil on, so if you're wanting it to be really precise, get out a ruler, take the extra, 2 seconds to measure them, because once I got mine up on the wall, some of the letters are not quite centered. I still really like how it turned out, but if you're looking for a more pristine look, definitely get out a ruler. S is another common letter, so it's only a point value of 1 as well. So here is the finished product. I think it turned out really well. Thank you so much for watching.